Hello, all. We are super excited and happy to welcome you back to the third episode of Data Pancakes. Before I get into this, I'd like to do a quick recap of where we left off in the previous episode. So, we defined on what's a data mesh concept, what are data domains, what's a data product, and other related terminology. Bringing back the slide where we left off in the previous episode, as you can see on the extreme left, we have what we call as source-oriented domains, and that's basically where your data is born. Once the data is made ready for consumption, it's metadata enriched. That's what we see here in the picture called data products. On the right hand side, you have consumption based domains. So these products needs to be used by other teams to generate insights. And that's what these consumption domains do. So they pick up the data, which are the data products, they transform it into whichever shape or form they need, and then they use it for their own purposes for generating insights and value. That said, in this particular episode, we are going to dive into both a source domain as well as a consumer domain. Many a time we see that both the source domain can also function as a consumer domain because the data which is generated on the consumer side is also becoming available for other parties to consume. So in that sense, they would become a producer. So we are going to dive into a fictitious airline company, going to explain to you how this really works out in practice and show how we can use that to implement this within Microsoft Fabric. With that, I'd like to hand it over to Pete Hine.
Yes, thanks. And showing concretely how this could work, what I've done, I have created an holistic overview of all business domains. So what you see here on the slide are many domains grouped logically together, also in larger domains in that respect. And they reflect what the business does. And in my view, this is the best approach you could take. So when it comes to defining domains, please look at your business. So, what does the business really do in that respect? Some people call these business capabilities. So, business capabilities come from BizBook. That's a methodology used within business architecture. And within business capability describes clearly what the business does. And for that, you need to have people, so the organization, there will be applications, you need to have technology, and there will be data sitting within those applications. And what you clearly see, so when you use BizBook and you look at business capabilities, so business domains, the people typically working within the business, they know each other very well. They speak the same language. So there's clearly a contextual boundary also surrounding that. The applications typically closely work together in order to achieve certain things. So the processes also typically are aligned with those business people and those applications. So business capability, therefore, I feel is a great way of studying your end-to-end organization, so your landscape surrounding the people and all the processes you would like to align. Some other organizations, they call these, well, business functions or other organizations, they look at workflows or customer journeys or journeys, they call them. But at the end, it's more or less the same. So you look at domains by studying really what the business does.
Question, Pete Hine. Now we define business context to become the definition for a domain boundary. There are many scenarios where customers are saying we operate in different geographies. So we want to define a domain based on a different location. So what's your take on this piece?
Okay, very good question. So what you see here on the screen is more abstractly how we look at the business, so how we defined it. So terminal management, for instance, is here abstractly defined. But when you start to instantiate it, you make a real realization of that more abstract business domain. So terminal management, so if this airline company operates globally and they operate in Europe as well as the United States, you could use the same business capability, terminal management, but instantiate that two times. So there will be then maybe a terminal implemented in Europe as well, a terminal within the United States. And then there will be maybe different applications even supporting those business concerns. There will be different people on the ground working within the business capability called terminal management. So this is abstractly how you could look at things, but concretely, when you start to implement things, you do an instantiation of these abstract business capabilities, and then therefore you will make it concrete and you see the solution space as well. I hope this answers your question.
Yes, it does. A follow-up to that, in that scenario, what would happen if these domains, for instance, start sharing applications, right?
Yeah, and the difficulty here as well, sometimes you see is sometimes it could be that these business capabilities abstractly utilize the same underlying applications. So then the applications are shared between business capabilities. And that's often the case. Maybe I worked within banking previously, and there we had retail banking, commercial banking, international banking. And it could be maybe very well that you use customer and information management. So another example you see here, but then I map it to banking, where you implement one application, but that application is used for three different business capabilities, so business concerns. And this is complicated because then you have shared data ownership, for instance. So the application then is implemented, instantiated just one time. So we have one application domain, but then used multiple times within the business. So different business domains in that respect. So there's an alignment and also a study you need to do when looking at the business, both also look at the applications you use behind. Another important thing, maybe when looking at this high level diagram, these business domains or business capabilities also in a way reflect boundaries. So you could use this model also for setting boundaries. And this could lead to principles, for instance, so when data is being distributed between asset management and real estate management, you insist data products are being created first as an entry point, so as an interface between these different business domains. Maybe you set other principles as well. So the operational systems likely maybe must be decoupled between one and another, or from an operational point of view. So API management, another example, always use the API gateway when consuming API from one domain between another. So that's where this model also could be used for. And to make it really concrete, I would like to show maybe an example. So what we have done, Sarat and I, and this will also be concretely showed in the demo you will give, Sarat, when showing Fabric. But what you see here on the screen, so that's the next slide, is a real example of two different domains. And we'll also make this very concrete in Fabric next. But what you see here is air flight operations management, and there's baggage handling management. So two different domains. Those come from the previous slide. So we have made these concrete now. So there's a real implementation, realization. And I often refer, well, there's an inner architecture of these domains. So these are the operational systems, and ideally there you have high flexibility, agility, and you decouple those operational systems from other domains. So like you see here, we have SQL Server and a web app and a logic app, and this is being used for managing the business, so air flight operations management. But when it comes to distributing data across, so between domains, so here in this particular example, we have provided standard platform services, allowing this domain to take ownership over their applications as well, doing the integration of that data. So they take data out of that operational application, so SQL Server here in this example. They use standard data integration services, and from that data, they develop a data product. And the data product then is the interface towards other domains. And there could be another domain consuming that data. So that domain maybe relies on that data. They use that for, again, running their own businesses. So package handling management, I think, could be very well that they rely on the air flight operations management data because they need to know when flights arrive, and they need to schedule then also the package handling in that respect. So they need data from another domain. But maybe the combined and integrated data could become very well a new data product. And that data product can be also be consumed by others. So like Sarat, you explained, consumers could be very well become data providers and distribute that data further. So when moving forward, what I've done to make it even more concrete for you, and next slide, we will also link the solution architecture, so the applications to this. But here coming from business architecture, what we have done, so we have implemented, instantiated to business domains. There's an application domain. So this refers to the operational systems like you saw in the previous slide. There's conceptually a domain model. So this is the contextual boundary, so the context we use for describing these applications. So when we develop applications, we look at business requirements. We have business terms, concepts. Those will be used as input when designing applications. We make a logical design. At the end, the physical design, we implement an application. So that context, so the domain model will be used as input for the application domain, as well for the data domain. So when we take data from these operational systems, we move it into an architecture like Microsoft Fabric. We extract that data from these operational systems. We work on that, and at the end, we build data products. And like you see here, data products then are the interfaces, as discussed previously, between these domains. Is a data product the same as a data domain? Well, I would argue no. The data domain is more all the surrounding items we need for working, using that data, extracting that data, the services we need, the people maybe working within that domain. They will work on that data, and the end result is a data product. And that's, I think, a subset of the entire data domain. So data domain in that respect is not a data product, so it's not the same. And between these domains, there could be semantic overlap. So there might be maybe business terms and definitions that look the same or are the same, or in other cases, the business term is the same, but the definition is slightly different. So there could be semantic overlap. And ideally, you capture that and you store that in a data catalog, for instance.
A question behind. How is the picture on the left related to these representations which you have on the right? Is there some kind of a relationship which you want our viewers to know?
Yeah, so again, these cells are the business capabilities I mentioned before. But yeah, I did some logical grouping. So what you often see, you could zoom out a lot and then from a large distance look at the business, your organization, and then define a domain as such, a very large domain. But maybe within you see other logical subdomains, and then when zooming further into, maybe you see even more subdomains. So business architecture often refers to business capabilities as level 1, level 2, level 3. So making clear, so what is the viewpoint or the distance you use when looking at the business. And then lastly, I would like to stress out, so the application domain ideally operates um, interdependent, so you keep things optimized there. So when you make changes to these applications, you should not disrupt other domains, so stay decoupled. And there's a bounded context. Well, and the bounded context means, well, there's a clear contextual boundary as well. Maybe we set principles and policies on these domains, meaning, like I said before, when distributing data between domains, always insist using domains. So use data products as an interface between one and another. And then, yeah, finally, and this is the last slide, and then I will hand it over to you for the demo. We have also mapped the technologies from Microsoft to these different domains. So here you see two concrete examples. So we have the air flight operations management domain, the baggage handling management domain. There's an application domain where we see applications. Those applications in this example are SQL Server, Azure SQL, and Cosmos DB, and those run on Azure, so on the cloud. And the data domain, well, that's the domain we will use within Fabric. So the Fabric domain won't be the entire business domain. So please keep that in mind.
Another question behind. In this picture, we see that on the application domain, you do have Azure, and on the data domain, you do have Fabric. But there's a domain model at the top, and there's nothing there. Could you explain a bit about that?
That's the context that describes this domain. So usually this sits in a data catalog, for instance, and therefore you see that icon Microsoft Purview where the domain context could be captured within. So there could be a glossary describing the domain model, so the domain context, and you use that glossary, so the business terms, for instance, to link to items you scan within the application domain. So in the application domain, there will be databases. When you scan, you will see data attributes or column names. You can use these column names for linking that to the domain model, so the business terms. But since it's the same data and the same context, the same boundary, the data products you will be building in the data domain rely on the data on the left, so in the application domain. And it's the same context you share. Huh? So there should not be a contextual change because it's the same semantics, the same business concert. It's more an interface, a nice representation of the data you have stored in that application domain. So the same domain model then likely will be used for linking to the elements of a data product. So therefore it sits on top and is connected to both the application domain as well the data domain. Let's switch to you then, Sarat. So please guide us through how a data domain then would look in Microsoft Fabric.
Thank you, Pete Hines. So that gets us to Microsoft Fabric. What is Microsoft Fabric? Well, it's the software as a service version of a data platform. So it's basically available out of the box, which empowers our users to go and quickly create insights out of data. And that's something which you would like to see, especially in that piece which is mapped as data domains, right? So data domains are usually seen as value creators, and that's exactly where Microsoft Fabric plays a role. So let's dive into a demo where we show, based on Pete Hines' explanation of two different domains in our airline company, how can these domains be defined within Microsoft Fabric, and how can we start defining work pieces within this, and how can teams start working inside Fabric as such. Let's get into a working demo. This is the home page of Microsoft Fabric. As you can see, I have different workloads within Microsoft Fabric, and of course, it serves as the SaaS or software as a service data platform for usage. Now, coming back to our scenario, we have positioned Fabric under the data domain space, right? So, how does this work in practice? So, I am a member of the Center of Excellence team within the fictitious airline company. I have administrative rights on this particular tenant. So what I would do first is for go and define my domains. How would I do that? I first get into settings. Under the governance and insights, I do have something I call as an admin portal. So I'd go into my admin portal, and here you can see a set of different settings, which is on a tenant level. We'll discuss about these in the later episodes. For now, we go back to define domains. I go into domains. I could say I want to define my domain. I create a new domain. As we discussed, we are going to create a domain called Air Flight Operations Management. Within Fabric, we have two different roles for domains. One is known as a domain administrator, and the second role is known as a domain contributor. If you go back to the concept which Pete Hine was mentioning, you would have seen that these domains, as we call it, are of course having a business context. And of course, these business contexts have owner, right? So there's a business owner associated in this case with an air flight operations management who is responsible for delivery of data, who is responsible for their business operations. So in that space, I would call or tag that person as a domain admin. So in this scenario, let's say that in the next episodes, we will see in the definition of personas how we are going to assign domain admins to these. For now, I'll just leave it as blank. Right. So basically, I have defined my air flight operations management, and the second one, which I'm going to define, is going to be by baggage handling management. Right. So I'm going to call it baggage handling management and going to create my second domain. So as you can see right now, I have two domains. One is called the air flight operations management, and the second one is called the baggage handling management. Let's actually get into this particular domain, right? So now I have my air flights operation management. Within that domain, I could have other teams, right, which focus on different subdomains or sub business lines, if you could call it. Let's take an example of air flight operations management. Assuming that in my company, I have both arrivals, the team which deals with arrivals of flights, and I have a different business teams which deals with departure of flights, right? So in that space, we have something or a definition called subdomains within Fabric. So I would define a new subdomain and call this air flight operations management and arrivals, right? So I create a new subdomain which is called Air Flight Operation Management Arrivals, and a second one which is Air Flight Operations Management Departures, right? So here I have two different subdomains under my parent, which was the Air Flight Operations Management. And the next thing would be that we start to define our teams and then start assigning these teams to this particular data domains. How would you do that? I would go back to my workspaces. Inside my workspace, I would create a new workspace. So before I do that, I just want to say now I'm switching roles. I'm moving from a tenant admin who had full rights. Now I'm going to put the hat of a team lead. So basically, a team lead within the arrivals subdomain. So how would I work with that? So I would define my first workspace where I want to work with. So I would say AOM, which kind of represents my team, and I would call it arrivals. So it's Air Flight Operation Management arrivals, and I would say that this is team one. And this is, I would say that this is my workspace for team one to collaborate. And as you can see here, I could select the domain, but you could also see the two different subdomains appearing here, right? And since I'm from the arrivals team, I would select that particular subdomain, and of course it gets tagged there. Under this, we have the option to select which capacity you want to run into. So Fabric is covered or powered by a single capacity model, which means that you purchase a capacity and all your workloads in this particular workspace, they are all powered by the same single capacity. So it's a single business model, which means that any item which you create in this particular workspace, they're all going to consume the same capacity. So in this case, I will just use a trial capacity, but of course, there are options to purchase this through Azure, and they're called Fabric capacities or Fabric SKUs. So I would just click on apply. So it creates my workspace. And inside my arrivals workspace, which is my team one, we would go and start creating what we call as a lake house. So the lake house is basically where you start storing your data, right? So basically that's where my arrivals data would come in. My application domain is starting to share my data. This is somewhere where my data would start to land inside my data domain. So I would call this as AOM, ARR, arrivals, lake house, and then give it a 0 1 tag. Even better, I would call this as bronze. So we are talking about the medallion in architecture. So we talk about bronze, silver, and gold. We have other episodes where we are going to focus on the ingestion piece, where we'll talk about this in details. But just go and read out about this. It's called the medallion architecture. For now, we are going to create three different lake houses, one for the bronze, one for the silver, and one for gold, right? So here, this is something which we'll also touch in the later episodes, but I just want to give what happens here, right? So I set a policy within Microsoft Purview, and that's Microsoft Information Protection Policy, which mandates any user in my firm, which is the air flight company, whenever I'm creating an item, it needs to be labeled. That's a mandatory thing which I set using a policy. So this kind of showcases the integration piece which we have, the tight integration which we have with Microsoft Purview. We will talk about this as we proceed on the journey, but for now, I'm going to select a confidential label and say it's going to be applied to my lakehouse. Similarly, I would go back to my workspace and also define my second lakehouse, which is again ARR underscore arrivals underscore silver, and I select the same confidentiality label. I would call it as unrestricted anyone. And the third lake house which I have is going to be my gold lake house. So that's AOM, operations management arrival, and this is lake house underscore gold. I would select again the confidentiality, just place it here, and that's it. So if I go back to my workspace, right? So I can see that I have my, if I filter on lake houses, I have my lake houses defined. So I have my bronze lake house, silver lake house, and my gold lake house. And basically, this is ready to start actually working and creating more data products out from here. So with this, I'd like to pass this back to Pete Hine and conclude our current episode.
Well, thanks a lot for passing it back to me. So let me do a quick recap. So we looked at business architecture. First, we saw holistically of the different domains. Then next we zoomed into a particular domain. So we saw the collaboration, we saw an inner architecture, so application domains. Ideally, those applications will be decoupled from other domains. And we saw in the diagram also standard platform services. And in the demo, we used Microsoft Fabric for that. So we use Microsoft Fabric for exporting data from the application domain, and at some point we will create data products and we will distribute that data between domains. Then next we saw in the demo from Sarat, he created two domains, so two concrete examples. So the air flight operations management domain as well baggage handling management, so another domain. And then within he created a data domain. So first, a larger empty data domain that holds two subdomains, so one for arrivals and another one for departures. And why? Because maybe in this particular example, there might be two different business teams dealing with specific requirements, maybe regulation, or they have contrasting needs in how often, frequently they make changes, or they would like to decouple these concerns with different domain owners, likely. But the data here in this example all comes from that single application domain we saw. So SQL Server or Azure SQL holds all that data. And we make an export, and then we model that data using two different subdomains. So arrivals and departures. And then within we create workspaces like we saw in the demo. Another alternative approach could be is we create one larger data domain. So that larger data domain then aligns with the application domain and the business domain, so air flight operations management. Meaning so we will have one domain owner for that larger domain. And then within we do the segregation within using workspaces, so for arrivals and departures. And this totally makes sense. So it's not wrong. And this could be a valid approach when you do not would like to deal with the overhead of managing additional data domains, for instance. An alternative approach, which you don't see on the screen, could be we use one workspace and then within we have both arrivals and departures data. Also is a valid approach if there are no contrasting requirements and there's a single team behind managing all of this data. You could also use one workspace for this. So all makes sense. So to conclude, so look at your business domains, study your business capabilities. That's the best practice. And then, zoom into further. So what applications do we discover? Can we logically group these into application domains? And how would we onboard the data from these application domains in an architecture like Microsoft Fabric? And then, so what teams are likely to work on that data and will use that data? So consider creating domains for that. So data domains, and do the segregation using workspaces. So this is how we end. And next episode, what we would like to discuss further are the personas. So in the demo from Sarat, you saw the domain admin, but there are more roles also related to this. So next episode, we will use a data governance framework, listing out all of the different personas and discuss how this will map to different services like Microsoft Fabric or Microsoft Purview. Hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching and see you next time.